OK, some more political news now. And the government is set to introduce a genetic technology bill to Parliament. And this is designed to cut red tape and boost future food security. So the invasion of Ukraine and the threat of climate change has forced governments to consider more carefully other options to ensure food security. Let's now talk to George Eustice, MP. George is the Secretary of State for the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, and he joins us now from Westminster. George, good morning to you.
Good morning.
I'm interested what you've got planned here and why this is so different. What will this mean? I mean, at a time of rising food prices and food security, will this help in any way?
Well, it's not going to give us any short-term solutions to rising food prices. Those are being driven by short-term factors like the gas price, for instance. But we've been working for some time on changing the inherited EU law that we had around these precision breeding technologies. And so there are practices called gene editing, where you move a trait within a species, so maybe from one variety of wheat to a different variety of wheat, and you're able to do what could be done through natural breeding processes, but in a more targeted and precise way. We want to make it easier for those seeds to get a marketing authorization, to bring them to market, to cultivate them, because it'll enable us to reduce our use of pesticides, reduce our use of fertilizers, and much more quickly enhance the breeding that we have in plants. And it's very different to genetic modification, and the European Union was frankly wrong to hold in a court case in 2018 that they should be treated as the same. That they're very different techniques, and that should be recognised.
Why was the EU so resistant to what you're now proposing?
Well, it was a judgment, really, of the European Court of Justice, and they literally looked at the words that were contained in a genetically modified piece of legislation. So it wasn't a judgment based on scientific assessment. It was, based on trawling through pages and pages of EU regulation that led to their conclusion. So what they ended up with is a conclusion that was technically correct as a matter of European law, but wrong as a matter of science. And so now we're outside the European Union, where we're in a position to be able to have science-based decisions in these areas, to put in place an authorization process that's appropriate for these precision breeding technologies, and to recognise that scientifically it is different to genetic modification.
Now, it's interesting. I mean, you say, they'll say they're right on the science, you'll say they're wrong on the science, but this sort of raises fears of Frankenstein type foods. And I'm looking at a story in the Times today, and it says shoppers will be unable to identify if your food is gene edited under your plans to accelerate development of crops and livestock with altered DNA and remove the requirement for it to be labelled as such. Why wouldn't you want people to know whether their food is gene edited or not?
Well, because there's nothing in this process that's any different to natural breeding. And so the key threshold for something to be deemed as a precision breeding technique rather than genetic modification is it would have to be possible through natural genetic selection and natural production. And plant breeding already uses a range of techniques to create, gene mutations, to select particular traits, and to use things like, F1 hybrid type techniques to get more uniformity in crops. These have been used for decades. No one ever said that an F1 hybrid crop needed to be specially labelled. So it's an extension of traditional breeding practice. Where it's different with genetic modification is you're taking a gene potentially across a species boundary. You might take a gene from a sugar beet and put it in a wheat crop, for instance, and that is fundamentally different, and that's why that is treated with a much stiffer regulatory regime.
I just want to say part of this is very, very exciting, of course. What you're trying to do is create the UK to be a centre of excellence and development and literally growth for this sort of thing, and drawing the best brains maybe from around the world and whatever. Could I, or would you be able to say, I mean, I would look at this and I'd be more excited and very excited if you were able to say to me, people who say are allergic to nuts, or people who are allergic to wheat or whatever, there may be advantages in this technology, in this research, in this development for them. Is that something that you would be hopeful of?
Well, yes, there may well be. And you know, the issue around allergies is complex, and our understanding of it is developing. Some of it is down to the sort of natural genetics that different human populations have. So some people are more susceptible to allergies than others. But if we could identify, the particular part of a plant, like a nut, that is causing the allergy and is causing that immune response, then yes, it may be possible to switch off some of those enzymes or make them less of a problem, provided that can be done through natural breeding techniques too. So there may be some options there, but in the near term, what we're likely to see is crops that have natural resistance to diseases, so that we don't have to use chemical pesticides. And I think that's what consumers want to see: fewer pesticides on their food, and this technology shows us a way to be able to achieve that.
Mr. Eustice, it's going to be a really busy day today in Parliament. Number 10, we've got Prime Minister's questions, also potentially the publication of Sue Gray's report. Are you nervous to read it?
Well, look, obviously she's already published an interim report, and we've had a very exhaustive inquiry by the police, and they've issued, as we now know, dozens of fixed penalty notices, including one for the Prime Minister himself, which he's paid, and he's apologised for all of those events. Obviously, we'll wait and see what the final Sue Gray report says. She's likely to build, I suspect, on some of the recommendations she made in her interim report, and obviously we'll study that very carefully.
Would you prefer if you didn't have to defend a Prime Minister who kept having to apologise?
Well, look, all of us, including the Prime Minister, would prefer that these episodes didn't happen at all. Of course, he's made that clear. He's apologised for the fact that they happened. They shouldn't have happened. Sue Gray in her interim report said there had been effectively a blurring of the lines between things like a drink maybe at the end of the day in a working environment, or a send-off for somebody who was departing, and a few words. Some of those descended into what it is now clear were actually parties, and that's why the police investigated, issued all those fixed penalties. Obviously, we would all prefer that none of this had happened, and other politicians, myself included, fully observed the rules, stayed in lockdown like everybody else. Of course, we all find it deeply frustrating that these episodes happened, right in number 10.
And just very quickly, if it is found by the Standards Committee that Boris Johnson misled Parliament, should he go?
Well, look, I think let's not get ahead of ourselves. They've got an investigation that they are conducting. The convention is that ministers should not knowingly, and MPs indeed, should not knowingly mislead Parliament. That is, the Prime Minister's given an account of his understanding of these events. But the Committee on Standards and Privileges are looking at this. They're obviously going to want to themselves take evidence from the Prime Minister and from others, before reaching a judgment. And I think we should let them, do that work and not get ahead of ourselves.